Hi, this is Dr. Astha, and in today's anatomy class, we will be talking about the muscles of anterior forearm. Muscles of anterior forearm can be divided into deep and superficial. The ones which are running superficially are altogether 5, whereas the ones which are deeper are altogether 3 muscles. Before going deep into the muscles of anterior of forearm, we need to understand few concepts. Most of the muscles included in this are the extrinsic muscles of hand. So it has its function mostly in hands and wrist. It is present anteriorly, so most of them work in order to cause flexion of the wrist or the fingers. Now coming to the superficial muscles. Altogether there are 5 superficial muscles, and today we will learn these muscles using the rule of 5. Take our 5 fingers and we use one hand and place the hand in the medial epicondyle of the humerus. The hand should be directed downwards and laterally in the forearm, and these 5 fingers represent the 5 superficial muscles of the forearm. Now coming to each muscle individually, the first muscle is represented by thumb, and this muscle is pronator teres. Now it comes from the medial epicondyle of humerus and moves laterally. It is almost present horizontally in the forearm, and it is the shortest muscle among the 5. So the pronator teres has altogether 2 origins. One head is in the medial epicondyle of the humerus and the other is the ulnar head, which is present in the anterior surface of the coronoid process of ulna. And this muscle is inserted in the middle of the shaft of the radius. Now let's come to the action of this muscle. Since it is running from here medially in the humerus to laterally in the radius, when the muscle shortens, it pulls the forearm into pronation in this way. That's why the function of pronator teres is to cause pronation of forearm. The second muscle, which is represented by the index finger, is the flexor carpi radialis. Now why is this muscle present in the second number? This muscle is the most lateral muscle of the forearm after pronator teres. And as the radius is present laterally, the flexor carpi radialis muscle also should come in the radial side, that is laterally. As it is for all the muscles, origin happens from the medial epicondyle of the humerus. It comes laterally, runs laterally, goes downwards, goes down in the wrist, crosses the wrist joint and gets inserted in the second and third metacarpal base. So it gets inserted in again the lateral side, that is the second and third metacarpal. Now because this muscle is crossing the wrist joint anteriorly and laterally, when the muscle shortens, it pulls the wrist in flexion and radial deviation. So this is the movement it causes, that is flexion with radial deviation. Now coming to the third muscle, that is palmaris longus, and it is represented by the middle finger, and this muscle originates from the medial epicondyle of the humerus. It runs downwards. It is almost present in the center of the forearm anteriorly, goes down and gets inserted in the flexor retinaculum. This is the muscle that now continues in our palm as palmar aponeurosis, which is responsible for gripping action. So the shortening of the muscle helps in flexion of the wrist and also to form the grip and helps in gripping. Now the fourth muscle of the anterior forearm is the flexor digitorum superficialis. It is represented by the ring finger, originates from the medial epicondyle of the humerus, and it is present medially in the forearm. Now there are altogether 3 heads of flexor digitorum superficialis, one coming from the medial epicondyle of humerus, another coming from the coronoid process of ulna, and one more coming from the anterior border of radius. So all 3 of them form a tendon which runs medially in the forearm and it crosses the wrist joint. Now before crossing the wrist joint, it divides into 4 tendons. After it reaches the metacarpophalangeal joint, this tendon further divides into 2. Each tendon divides into 2, runs laterally and gets inserted in the base of the middle phalanx. insertion of this muscle I will again explain with diagram when I am talking about flexor digitorum profundus. Now the fifth muscle is flexor carpi ulnaris muscle. This muscle has two heads of origin. One is the medial epicondyle of the humerus and the other is the ulnar head. It comes from the olecranon process of the ulna. The muscle then goes downwards. It remains in the medial aspect of the anterior forearm and it crosses the wrist joint to get inserted in the pisiform bone, and the extension of it also gets inserted in the base of fifth metacarpal. Now since the muscle is passing the wrist joint anteriorly and medially, when the muscle shortens, it causes flexion of the wrist along with the ulnar deviation. So its action is to cause flexion with ulnar deviation. So now we have completed all the superficial muscles of the forearm. Coming to the deep muscles, there are altogether 3 deep muscles. The first muscle is flexor pollicis longus. Pollicis is the other word used for thumb. It is from the anterior surface of the shaft of the radius, goes down, crosses the wrist joint, crosses the carpometacarpal joint, metacarpophalangeal joint, and gets inserted in the base of distal phalanx of thumb. Since this muscle crosses the IP joint of thumb, the MCP joint, the CMC joint, the wrist, it is responsible for causing flexion in all these joints. Now the other muscle is pronator quadratus. Pronator quadratus is a very short muscle which is present only in the forearm. It originates from the lower end of the ulna and gets inserted in the lower end of the radius. And when the muscle shortens, it pulls the forearm into pronation. Therefore, the action of pronator quadratus is to cause pronation in the forearm. Coming to the third muscle, that is flexor digitorum profundus. Flexor digitorum profundus has its course almost similar to flexor digitorum superficialis. This muscle originates from the ulna, the anterior and the medial aspect of the shaft of ulna. Almost the 3/4 of the shaft of ulna is covered by this muscle. It runs down and the tendon of it lies deeper than the superficialis. So the flexor digitorum superficialis is present in this way, whereas the flexor digitorum profundus lies exactly below it. So this is how it runs throughout its course. Now after crossing the wrist joint, the flexor digitorum profundus also divides into 4 tendons for the medial forefinger. It keeps running straight and gets inserted in the base of the distal phalanx. So since the muscle is passing the distal interphalangeal joint, proximal interphalangeal joint, metacarpophalangeal joint, carpometacarpal joint and the wrist joint, it is responsible for causing flexion of all these joints. But the major action of this muscle is in the distal interphalangeal joint. Now let me demonstrate to you the insertion of flexor digitorum superficialis and flexor digitorum profundus in the diagram. So this is the diagram of hand where this is the thumb and this is the little finger. So in thumb we have only 2 phalanges. So this is the MCP joint, metacarpophalangeal joint, and we have one joint that is the IP joint. In other 4 fingers we have MCP, we have PIP, that is proximal interphalangeal joint, and DIP, that is distal interphalangeal joint. Now the tendon of flexor digitorum superficialis and profundus, both of them run together. Let me first demonstrate the superficialis tendon. It comes down in the forearm. After reaching the flexor retinaculum, the tendon divides into 4 for each medial 4 fingers. Now the tendon runs till the metacarpophalangeal joint of the medial 4 fingers. Now similarly, even for the flexor digitorum profundus also lies right below it. So the pink dotted one represents our flexor digitorum profundus, which is lying deeper than the superficialis tendon. Okay, till it reaches the metacarpophalangeal joint. Flexor digitorum superficialis is prominent and it is superficially present. whereas the profundus is lying deeper and is always hidden by the superficialis tendon. After it reaches the metacarpophalangeal joint, the flexor digitorum superficialis, it divides further into two tendons. Now each tendon divides into two and goes towards the medial and the lateral side of each finger. So this way it divides into two, and it gets inserted in the base of the middle phalanx. Okay, so this is the insertion of the superficialis tendon. Now what happens to the profundus tendon? Let me show you in a bigger diagram. I've made a diagram of only one finger. So till the MCP joint, the superficialis and profundus both came together. Here it divided, the superficialis tendon divided into two and got inserted in the base of middle phalanx. Since the superficialis tendon has sidelined here, the deep tendon, that is the profundus tendon, it becomes more prominent like a hero. It keeps moving downwards and gets inserted in the distal phalanx, in the base of the distal phalanx. So this is our profundus tendon and this is our superficialis tendon. Since the flexor digitorum superficialis is crossing the PIP joint, the major action of this muscle is to cause flexion in the proximal interphalangeal joint, which is here. So the major function of the superficialis tendon is to cause flexion in the PIP joint, that is proximal interphalangeal joint, whereas the profundus tendon, it goes prominently, it becomes more prominent and it reaches till the end, that is the distal phalanx. So the major action of the profundus tendon is to cause flexion in the distal interphalangeal joint. Now coming to the nerve supply of anterior compartment of forearm muscles. So the anterior compartment muscles are all supplied by median nerve except flexor carpi ulnaris. It is the ulnar side of the muscle and it is supplied by ulnar nerve. Also the flexor digitorum profundus, a half portion of flexor digitorum profundus is supplied by ulnar nerve and the remaining half is supplied by median nerve. Therefore the flexor digitorum profundus is a muscle that has dual nerve supply. It is supplied by both median and ulnar nerve. Rest all the superficial muscles and deep muscles are supplied by median nerve. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Don't forget to like my video and subscribe my channel. Thank you and bye-bye.